I'm going to take a deep breath and tell you about all the people in the movie Bob Roberts. Gore Vidal, John Cusack, Alan Rickman. We've really got to savor his performances. Susan Sarandon, James Spader, Kelly Willis, the musician, Giancarlo Esposito, Bob Balaban, Jack Black. This was his debut. Helen Hunt, and of course, Tim Robbins, who wrote and directed the film. This was his directorial debut, although he had worked on similar material for Saturday Night Live. This is an extension of a skit from that show. SNL tends to be a little too on the nose for my taste. I heard about Bob Roberts from a different TV show, none other than The Simpsons. The episode in which Sideshow Bob runs for mayor is called Sideshow Bob Roberts, and it has some loose references to this movie. Once again, The Simpsons predicts the future. Bob Roberts is a movie about a conservative folk singer running to be the senator for the state of Pennsylvania, one of the senators at least. It has this big list of stars, some of them connected to Robbins through SNL, but this film isn't a blockbuster, it's a mockumentary. The opening credits introduce it as a documentary by Terry Washington, but I don't think they're fooling anybody with that. The film goes on to skewer American politics and media, and 'tis the season for that. I guess with the presidential election in Moldova less than a week away, I figured this was the perfect time to take a look at Bob Roberts. Did the movie predict the future? Does it explain what's going on in America and Moldova today? Is it any good? I might answer at least one of these questions in this video. Yeah, maybe you thought this was going to be a Halloween video, but I actually forgot that Halloween was going to land on the day this video is coming out. Still, this is pretty spooky, and I absolutely would not recommend Bob Roberts to anyone trying to soothe their election anxiety. Maybe wait 2 weeks before watching it, or depending on how things go, never watch it. Simple as that. Let's start with the music. Bob Roberts is a folk singer, and the movie is really based around his tunes. You can kind of tell that they came first. I wouldn't say that the rest of the movie is an afterthought, but there's some empty space. The songs themselves are clever, a little on the nose, but I like them. Roberts is a takeoff, or really a complete reversal of Bob Dylan. He has 3 albums. The Freewheelin' Bob Roberts, Times Are a Changin' Back, and, you're going to love this one, Bob on Bob. All of these are takeoffs of Dylan records. Of course, we're even treated to a spoof Bob Dylan video at one point in the movie, which is pretty funny, and a nice moment of mixed media, although their decision to turn Bob Dylan into a rapper, I don't know, you draw your own conclusions about that. Bob Roberts is set in the 90s. We're not parodying Dylan so much as showing how the values he stood for have been completely effaced and reversed by a corporate but also strangely traditional movement. The counterculture, if you will. Actually, I'm hoping to start a movement to combat it, which will be called, well, you get the idea. Bob Roberts, the character and the movie are structured against the 1960s. Bob's main campaign platform is fighting drug use. Not really the war on drugs as we know it today, but some sort of self-respect through abstinence angle. Actually, his campaign motto is pride, which has somewhat different connotations today, I think. Bob talks about his mother being a peacenik. He talks about her with disdain, and his personality could be described in terms of the old rebellion against one's parents, which would be a bit ironic for a purported traditionalist. Tim Robbins' father, in real life, was a folk singer, a member of the Highwaymen, not the country music supergroup, but more like a less famous version of the Kingston Trio, or a less hip version of Peter, Paul, and Mary. Tim Robbins' musical talent is all over this movie, and it's no secret where we got some of the inspiration. He was made to make a movie like this in some ways, with his heritage. I was hoping to listen to the soundtrack after watching the movie, but it was never released, I guess. Apparently Tim Robbins didn't want the songs out in the world, out in the wild, without the obvious marks of satire. Going back to the 60s for a second, this film is also probably tapping into the Kennedy storyline today. It reads a little like it's backwards looking. Speaking of the trappings of satire, Bob Roberts is a mockumentary that is supposedly filmed by one cameraman that follows around one presenter. The movie doesn't get a ton of mileage out of this sort of conspicuous artifice. The presenter is British, just like the production company that made the film, and has a pretty hands-off approach, kind of just asking questions. I'm not really sold on the framing of the movie, but one thing it makes way for are some nicely choreographed long takes where the camera is following Bob through some venue where there's all kinds of things going on around him, walk and talk shots, like you might find in a certain political television show of later years. This is a movie that is to some degree zooming in on media itself, and having the camera as a character in every scene is a way to allude to this. Again, I think the movie falls a little bit short of insight here, but there's something. We do see media being produced and consumed almost constantly. We see Bob Roberts doing a TV appearance, and then we see it broadcasting on TV that night, and we see his campaign watching it and reacting to it. His campaign will huddle around some TV to watch a news broadcast, and when it finishes, they'll all celebrate, pump their fists in the air, and say, "What a killer spot, Bob." You get a sense of this logic of media production, how this game with the media and politics worked. I think that's one of the more vivid and valuable parts of this movie. When it comes to the mockumentary nature of the film, like I said, it could be connected into this, but they don't quite close the deal. When people watch satirical movies like Bob Roberts, they often say things like, "Wow, this movie is more relevant now than ever. Wow, they got everything that's wrong about America, right? They understood it all." To me, these sort of claims tend to not be very rigorous, although I see where people are coming from. I think partly there is a sort of confirmation bias that happens where a movie can have a couple of lines that are striking, and people will really zoom in on those and forget a whole bunch of other stuff that falls flat or didn't pan out. I don't want to get too deep into the political mire, but let's think about how prophetic Bob Roberts really is. Well, we've yet to elect a folk singer, at least not to the Senate, so the movie struck out on that front. Maybe Trump thinks of himself as a rock star. Bob Roberts loves to fence and ride his motorbike. That doesn't seem particularly prophetic. Robbins, though, wasn't really banking on these predictions, and it's not exactly the point of satire to get everything right. There also are a number of things that are pretty spot on. We were just talking about how the film focuses on the media, for instance. This still feels relevant today, although it's not perfect, but it feels relevant. There are a couple of lines that come straight out of the playbook of a certain modern politician. For instance, whenever Bob Roberts faces a tough interview, whenever the interviewer challenges him or grills him, he scolds them back, mainly for not being impartial. He lectures them on the role of the media. This is a little bit eerie, although it stops way short of the kind of rhetoric that Trump uses today. It does allude to this position that we have in 2024, where actual discussion and debate is superseded, sidestepped by this claim of bias. And this bias claim is something that can gain momentum without ever being really litigated, as if people claiming that there is bias is proof that there is. Somehow asking hard questions delegitimizes people when it should do exactly the opposite. Furthermore, there's this strange inversion where claiming that someone is biased somehow snatches the intellectual high ground from actually making a point about the issues, as if knowing about bias is some sacred knowledge that only members of a certain political club have access to, and that's way cooler than actually talking about things. I think one thing that people forget about when trying to figure out what's going on right now, trying to figure out why anyone would vote for Trump, is the sense of belonging that political affiliation can bring. I'm not really trying to empathize here, but people see political figures as successful people sometimes that offer an unwavering example of a righteous life, and they want to be a part of that, which usually means thinking and talking like an insider. Trump supporters don't believe Trump so much as they think that they are in on his scheme. That's what I suspect. And Bob Roberts alludes to this a little bit. It spells some of this stuff out. Bob Roberts paints himself as a self-made man who is a lost child, but found himself in the army and then became a millionaire on Wall Street. So he's a success, and he's an outsider. He preaches the doctrine of his own success. That's really his main selling point, is his own success, and it does have some kind of allure. Sounds familiar. Keep in mind that Bob Roberts is a young, smooth-talking politician going up against an older, gruffer, more sincere politician. The incumbent, the veteran Democrat, is played by Gore Vidal. One thing that this movie is poking fun at is how insincere politicians are. Bob Roberts constantly seems to be putting on an act, and there's a slight doubleness here with the acting that Tim Robbins is doing in the movie and the acting that Bob Roberts is doing as a politician. Say what you want about Trump, but he doesn't give you the feeling of being a smooth-talking politician like Bob Roberts. In fact, part of being in on Trump's scheme is that it probably feels like a type of political non-participation, right? Being a Trump supporter is like non-participation. A vote for Trump feels like a vote against a political system that a lot of people are sick of, perhaps rightfully so. So this is a big difference from Bob, although we do see Roberts try to paint himself as an outsider or a rebel, but he isn't anywhere near successful at this as Trump, who is a master of the role of an outlaw, maybe because he really is one, at least in terms of rejecting norms, serving himself, being a criminal, etc. Bob Roberts doesn't come close to this. And in general, the rhetoric that we hear from Bob falls way short of what you can hear on the news today. So no need to go out and buy this movie. Just flip to CNN, I guess. Anyway, getting a bit sidetracked here. I'm not saying that Tim Robbins should have seen what was coming. The point is that if you're about to type, oh, Bob Roberts predicted everything. Oh, they knew what was happening. They knew what's wrong in America. No, they did not predict everything. When we talk about media, a huge thing that the movie doesn't know about, and I mean, right, media is a huge theme of this film, perhaps the biggest one, but this movie completely misses on one thing, completely overlooks something, which is the role of alternative to media, like social media, crappy blogs, annoying YouTube channels, the internet. Maybe saying it's missing them isn't fair, because these things simply did not exist at the time or were in their most fledgling of state. But I described how Bob Roberts, captures the movie, how it captures the logic of media creation. How that's one of those most valuable insights. But that's all about traditional corporate media. It's all through the lens of TV, essentially. And yeah, I mean, Trump started on TV, but there's a lot more to his story. Tim Robbins was working on SNL, so he probably saw this firsthand how it works. And actually, there's a part of the movie that spoofs SNL as Cutting Edge Live, and we get to see some of the backstage politics about all of this. So you can see how he arrived at this frame and at this logic, which was very salient to him, and which was probably extremely important at the time. But if there's one thing that enabled Trump, probably, and that defines today's cultural landscape, it's the rise of internet media and possibly the degradation of the American attention span and brain. I'll leave that one for you to evaluate. But the point is that it's impossible to argue that the internet alternative media isn't a huge, huge, huge part of the political story today, and this movie just doesn't know about any of that stuff. Another thing that tends to happen with these older satirical movies is that they can often undershoot how extreme the future is. One movie that comes to mind is Network. That's a movie that I haven't watched this for a long time. I'll probably rewatch it maybe as part of the upcoming Faye Dunaway series. But anyway, these old satires, you think, wow. At the time you'd watch it, wow, this is crazy. This could never happen. And you watch it today and you're like, what? This already happened. This happened 20 years ago, right? Bob Roberts maybe has some of this in it. The movie, for instance, makes a show of Bob Roberts' campaign bus called the Pride, which is outfitted as a mobile trading floor so that he can continue his business empire while on the road. Okay, Trump is not trading stocks day to day while campaigning, but this intermingling of politics and business, that is a thing. And it's pointed in this movie, but it falls way short of the sort of business empire. In fact, possibly just the entire campaign for profit kind of thing that's going on now, the intermingling of the corporate and the political now, and sort of the almost disappearance of the political servant, of the, lifelong politician and such, goes way farther than what you see in this movie. So does Bob Roberts get it right? Well, yes and no. I don't think that satire is really about accurately predicting the future, but it's interesting to see how history can move out from under a movie like this, how something that once would have seemed very, way over the top can be less extreme than what actually happened. And again, be careful with this confirmation bias where you think, oh, they got it all spot on, because most of the time, no. On the other hand, you might take something completely different from this movie. Not that, wow, it's even more extreme than they thought. But you may also say that, the times that we're living in today, which seemed unprecedented, maybe they're actually not. Maybe they're actually precedented, right? There's a couple of well-placed dog whistles in Bob Roberts. For instance, Bob calls a reporter a communist. Wow, they really saw into the future with that one. I mean, Trump calls people a communist. Here's Bob Roberts doing it way back in 1990. But that remark is actually looking backwards to when red baiting was far more extreme than it is today, right? For some reason, this line of attack is still going strong after 70 years. So is this movie really forward-looking? Is it really peering into the future? Or was it just reporting the news and things haven't changed as much as you might think? Probably it's some of both, but that's not an easy question to answer. Of course, remember that we are comparing real events to fictional ones, and we're trying to think about what has changed and what has stayed the same over the years, and that is a very hard thing to wrap your head around. Politically, we always seem to be on the verge of catastrophe, now more than ever. Maybe that's the nature of partisanship. I remember when I was a kid, I went to a bookstore with my parents, Orca Books in Olympia, Washington, and they were selling these little keychains with a Bush countdown timer on them. I really wanted one, but my mother said, well, it'll be garbage once he's out of office. And I looked at the countdown timer and it said 2.5 years to go. And I thought, what do you mean when he's out of office? That's not for 2.5 years. That's forever. I mean, 2.5 years, we'll all be dead by then, right? I remember thinking that Bush was an apocalyptically bad president, a fool, an embarrassment, couldn't string a sentence together. I was a child, so I didn't have the most nuanced perspective, and I don't think that's true now. Not exactly a fan. But anyway, a lot of people did feel that way, right? A lot of people, not a fan. But how does it feel now? Trump is clearly more extreme. He's steamrolling norms, threatening to cross boundaries that have never been crossed in any of our lifetimes. Do we just need to get used to the political stakes feeling higher every time? Is it just going to get worse, monotonically more extreme and worse for all of eternity? How can that be? As you can see, the post-election soul-searching has already begun. Hopefully this video isn't rambling around too much. Honestly, I'm pretty optimistic about the election. Anyway, the thing about Bob Roberts is that it's a meditation on extremes, a meditation on extremes. Extremeness is the logic and the language of satire. And that's probably the main thing that resonates with me about this movie. I don't think that Bob Roberts packs much of a punch on the issues. To be honest, it's kind of vague. I don't think it predicts much either, but it does make you think about something. I can't tell you exactly what my conclusion is, but something about the times and the extremes that we put up with. Times are changing back. How prophetic was that famous album from Bob Roberts? So I think you probably get the idea by now. Really, Bob Roberts is a movie about demagoguery, which is something that is never going out of style. We've got more of it than ever. So yeah, the movie feels pretty fresh, but on the other hand, it's kind of a one-trick pony. The film almost opens up another chapter with its more liberal characters, the other side of the aisle. We see a few of them, but again, we don't quite get far enough down the road here. At least I didn't feel like it. At least the movie avoids being too preachy on its face, although it's fairly obvious what its agenda is. Another thing that's changed maybe about this movie is that the behind-the-scenes nature of the film, seeing what a campaign is really like, might not be as interesting or as compelling today as it was then, since everybody has seen The West Wing now, and since campaigns have started pumping out candid moments left, right, and center. In fact, if I had a little bit more time to think, it'd be interesting to think about the evolution of the behind the scenes of politics or something about like that, and how our exposure to candidates has just grown more and more over time, and all these things, right? This movie fits somewhere in that story, but I haven't really thought about it. Nonetheless, this is a fairly precise satire, nicely laid out. Maybe it doesn't seem totally extreme anymore, but it's fun, I guess. I've seen this described as a hilarious comedy. I don't think I was laughing out loud the whole time, but it is pretty funny. In general, I enjoyed watching it. I do find Tim Robbins to be a little smug, but here he is playing a smug character, so it more or less works out. Look, guys, my YouTube analytics say that 99.9% of my viewers are in Moldova, so please make sure you go vote in the upcoming election. And hey, whatever happens, let's use this video as a bookmark to the fact that on Halloween, we really didn't know how this was going to turn out. Man, uncertainty is truly the spice of life, isn't it?